Karen Middleton stood at her living room window, her manicured fingers drumming against the glass as she surveyed her kingdom, or at least what she believed to be her kingdom. Willow Creek Estates stretched before her, a pristine collection of beige and cream-colored townhouses with perfectly manicured lawns and regulation-approved mailboxes. As president of the Homeowners Association for 3 consecutive years, Karen had transformed this modest development into what she proudly called a beacon of residential excellence. "Absolutely not," she muttered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. Across the street, a young man was unloading what appeared to be, heaven forbid, a bright red motorcycle from a trailer. The audacity of it made her blood pressure spike. She grabbed her phone and speed-dialed the first number on her HOA enforcement list. "Janet? Karen Middleton here. We have a Code 7 situation on Maple Drive." "Yes, another one." "No, I'm not overreacting. There's a motorcycle. A red one." Karen Middleton wasn't just any HOA president. She was the HOA president. At 47, she had perfected the art of suburban surveillance, maintaining detailed files on every resident's infractions, from garbage cans left out past 7 a.m. to unauthorized window treatments. Her own house stood as a testament to HOA compliance. Beige siding, regulation brass door knocker, and a lawn so perfectly trimmed it could have been featured in a magazine about the monotony of modern suburbia. "I don't care if he just moved." In Janet, rules are rules. The handbook clearly states no motorcycles in driveways, Section 12.3, subsection B. "I should know. I wrote it." She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "City Code Enforcement? This is Karen Middleton from Willow Creek Estates. I need someone here immediately. We have a resident flagrantly violating multiple ordinances." The young man across the street, tall, lean, with dark hair and wearing what Karen could only describe as deliberately casual clothing, seemed oblivious to the chaos he was about to unleash. He was actually smiling as he wheeled the motorcycle up his driveway, stopping to wave at an elderly neighbor who had come out to watch. "The nerve," Karen breathed, her grip tightening on her phone. She speed-dialed her lieutenant in the HOA. War Against Disorder. Margaret Chen, her next-door neighbor and fellow compliance enthusiast. "Margaret, are you seeing this? The new tenant in 1247 is parking a motorcycle in his driveway, in broad daylight like some sort of rebel." "Oh my," Margaret's voice crackled through the phone. "Should I call the police?" "Not yet. Let me handle this properly. First, we document everything, then we escalate through proper channels. I'll start with a formal warning, then move to fines, then, if necessary, we'll explore legal eviction options." Karen grabbed her camera and began taking photos, zooming in on the license plate, the make and model, even the young man's face. She had learned long ago that in the world of homeowner association disputes, documentation was everything. 20 minutes later, Karen stood at the door of 1247 Maple Drive, her clipboard in hand and her most authoritative expression firmly in place. She had changed from her morning robe into her official business outfit, a navy blazer, pressed khakis, and her gold-plated HOA president pin prominently displayed on her lapel. The door opened, and the young man stood before her, still smiling. That infuriating, carefree smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "You must be one of my new neighbors. I'm Marcus. I'm Karen Middleton, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "I'm here regarding your immediate violation of our community standards." Marcus's smile didn't waver. "Oh? What violation would that be?" Karen gestured dramatically toward the motorcycle, as if its very existence was a personal affront to civilized society. "That vehicle is in direct violation of Section 12.3, subsection B of our HOA regulations. No motorcycles, recreational vehicles, or non-standard automobiles may be parked in driveways or visible from the street." "I see," Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And when was this rule enacted?" 3 years ago, during my first term as president. It was necessary to maintain property values and community standards." "Interesting." Marcus leaned against his doorframe, apparently in no hurry to resolve what Karen considered a crisis-level situation. "And you're absolutely certain this rule applies to my property?" The question struck Karen as odd, but her confidence never wavered. "Of course it applies. Every property within Willow Creek Estates is subject to HOA regulations. There are no exceptions." Marcus's smile grew wider, and something about it made Karen's stomach flutter with an unfamiliar sensation. Was it doubt? Impossible. "Well, Mrs. Middleton, I appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourself. I'll certainly look into this matter." "Look into it?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "There's nothing to look into. You need to remove that motorcycle immediately, or face escalating fines starting at $500 per day." $500 per day seems steep," Marcus replied, still maddeningly calm. "But I understand you take your position very seriously." "I take community standards seriously, young man. Property values, neighborhood safety, quality of life, these things matter." "They absolutely do," Marcus agreed. "Tell me, how long have you lived here?" The question caught Karen off guard. 15 years. I've been here since the development opened. I've watched this community grow from an empty lot to the premier residential destination it is today." 15 years, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "That's impressive dedication. And you've been HOA president for 3 of those years?" 3 consecutive years, Karen corrected proudly. "Elected by a landslide each time. The residents trust me to maintain standards." "I'm sure they do." Marcus glanced at the motorcycle, then back at Karen. "You know what? Let me make you a deal. Give me 24 hours to look into this situation. If I'm still in violation tomorrow, we'll discuss appropriate next steps." Karen felt a moment of triumph. Finally, the young man was showing proper respect for authority. 24 hours, she agreed sternly. "But I want that eyesore gone by tomorrow morning, or I'll be forced to take official action." "Understood completely," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Thank you for being such a dedicated neighbor, Mrs. Middleton. The community is lucky to have someone so thorough." Something in his tone made Karen look at him more carefully, but his expression remained pleasant and deferential. She shook his hand briskly and turned to leave, already mentally composing the violation notice she would prepare for tomorrow, if necessary. As she walked back to her house, Karen felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. Another crisis averted, another resident educated about proper community standards. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Rivera had spent the entire conversation fighting the urge to laugh out loud, because Marcus Rivera wasn't just a new tenant. Marcus Rivera owned the entire block. Back in her house, Karen immediately called an emergency session of the HOA board. Margaret Chen arrived within minutes, followed by Bob Hendricks from 2 streets over, and finally Janet Walsh, the HOA secretary, and Karen's most reliable ally in the war against residential chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, pacing her living room like a general addressing troops, "we have a situation that threatens the very foundation of our community standards." "Is it really that serious?" Bob asked, settling his considerable bulk into Karen's sofa. At 62, Bob had been reluctantly serving on the HOA board for 1 year, mainly because his wife had threatened to make his life miserable if he didn't participate in community activities. "Bob, I need you to understand something," Karen said, her voice taking on the tone she usually reserved for educating particularly dense residents. "If we allow one person to flagrantly violate our regulations, it opens the floodgates. Next, someone will want to paint their house purple. Someone else will install unauthorized garden gnomes. Before you know it, Willow Creek Estates will look like some sort of Bohemian artist colony. Margaret shuddered visibly. We can't let that happen. Exactly. Karen pulled up photos on her phone. Look at this monstrosity. It's not even a tasteful motorcycle, if such a thing exists. It's red, it's loud, and it's a direct assault on everything we've worked to build here. Janet, ever the loyal secretary, was already taking notes. What's our legal standing, Karen? Rock solid, Karen replied confidently. Section 12.3, subsection B is crystal clear. I wrote it myself after the Henderson incident 3 years ago. Bob shifted uncomfortably. What? Henderson incident? Before your time, Karen waved dismissively. Jerry Henderson tried to park his vintage Mustang in his driveway, claimed it was a classic car and therefore exempt from standard regulations. I had to shut that down immediately. Give people an inch, they'll take a mile. So what's the plan? Margaret asked, pen poised over her own notepad. Karen had been waiting for this question. Full escalation protocol. I've already documented the violation with photographs. Tomorrow, if the motorcycle isn't removed, we issue a formal citation. If he refuses to comply, we begin daily fines. If he still refuses, we explore legal options for forcing compliance. What if he fights it? Bob asked. The question annoyed Karen. Bob had a tendency to ask these negative, defeatist questions that undermined the board's confidence. He won't. Karen's hands trembled as she dialed the number for Thompson and Associates, the law firm that had handled her divorce 5 years earlier. It was the only legal contact she had, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I need to speak with Robert Thompson immediately, she told the receptionist, pacing her living room like a caged animal. This is an emergency. I'm sorry, but Mr. Thompson is with a client. Can I? This is Karen Middleton. Tell him it's about a hostile takeover of a residential community. Tell him someone is trying to steal an entire neighborhood out from under. It's residents. The urgency in her voice must have carried through the phone, because within 2 minutes, Robert Thompson's familiar baritone filled her ear. Karen, what's this about a hostile takeover? Bob, I need you to drop everything and help me. Some con artist claims he owns all the property in my HOA community. He's trying to intimidate me with fake paperwork and threats. Slow down, Thompson said. Start from the beginning. Karen took a deep breath and launched into the story, starting with the motorcycle violation and ending with Marcus Rivera's shocking claims about owning the entire development. She spoke rapidly, the words tumbling over each other in her haste. To explain the urgency of the situation. He says he owns my house, Bob. My house that I've been paying a mortgage on for 15 years. He claims every resident is now his tenant. It's insane. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Karen, have you verified any of these claims? Of course not. They're obviously false. I don't need to verify lies. Actually, you do, Thompson said gently. Property ownership is a matter of public record. If this man is making specific claims about deeds and ownership, those can be easily verified. Karen felt a spike of irritation. Whose side are you on here, Bob? I'm on the side of facts, Thompson replied. Before we can determine any legal strategy, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I can have someone pull the property records this afternoon. Fine. But I want you to know that whatever this Marcus Rivera person has done, it has to be illegal. You don't just buy an entire neighborhood without telling the residents. Actually, Thompson said, and Karen detected a note of hesitation in his voice. Depending on how the original development was structured, it might be perfectly legal. Master lease agreements aren't uncommon in certain types of residential developments. What do you mean? Well, if the original developer retained ownership of the underlying land while selling the houses, then yes, someone could potentially buy the master lease and become the effective landlord for the entire community. Karen felt the room spinning around her. But it would mean that every homeowner is essentially a tenant, regardless of whether they're paying a mortgage. The mortgage would be on the house itself, but not the land underneath. That's ridiculous. No one would buy a house under those conditions. You'd be surprised, Thompson said dryly. Developers use creative financing structures all the time. Most buyers don't read the fine print, they just focus on the monthly payment. Karen sank into her chair, suddenly feeling very old and very tired. Bob, if what you're saying is true, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll have my paralegal pull all the relevant property records today. We'll know exactly where things stand by tomorrow morning. After ending the call, Karen immediately dialed Margaret Chen's number. Margaret, I need you to come over right now. Emergency board meeting. What's happened? Margaret asked, alarm evident in her voice. Just come over and call Bob and Janet. Tell them it's a code red situation. Within an hour, Karen's living room was filled with the core members of the HOA board, all looking varying degrees of concerned and confused. Karen had spent the intervening time reviewing every piece of paperwork related to her home purchase, trying to find something, anything, that would contradict Marcus Rivera's claims. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen began, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. We are facing an unprecedented threat to our community. She outlined everything Marcus had told her, watching as her fellow board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to confusion to growing alarm. So this Rivera person claims he owns all our houses? Bob Hendricks asked, his face pale. Not the houses themselves, the land underneath them, Karen clarified, though the distinction felt increasingly meaningless. How is that possible? Janet asked. I mean, I have a deed to my property. According to my lawyer, it's possible if... The original development was structured as a master lease arrangement, Karen admitted reluctantly. But we would have known about something like that, Margaret protested. We've all lived here for years. We've been paying mortgages, property, taxes. Property taxes on the structures, Karen said, the pieces starting to fall into place in her mind. Not on the land itself. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What does this mean for the HOA? Janet asked quietly. Karen had been dreading this question. If Rivera's claims are true, then the HOA exists only at the discretion of the landowner. Technically, he could dissolve it entirely. He can't do that, Bob said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Actually, he can, Karen said, hating every word. The HOA's authority derives from the property ownership structure. If he owns the underlying land, then he has ultimate authority over what happens on that land. Margaret stood up abruptly. This is insane. We need to fight this. We need to get the residents together and what? Karen interrupted. Tell them that everything they thought they knew about their homes might be wrong, that their elected HOA board has been operating under a false assumption for years? We didn't know, Janet said defensively. That's the problem, Karen replied bitterly. We didn't know, but we should have. I should have. The admission cost her. Karen Middleton had built her identity around being the person who knew everything, who stayed on top of every detail, who caught problems before they became crises. The idea that she had missed something this fundamental was devastating. So, what do we do? Bob asked. We verify everything, Karen said, her resolve hardening. We get the facts, we understand the legal situation, and then we figure out how to fight it. What if there's nothing to fight? Margaret asked quietly. What? If he's telling the truth? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Karen looked around at her fellow board members, people who had trusted her leadership, who had followed her vision for what Willow Creek Estates could become. Then we adapt, she said finally. But we don't give up. After the others left, Karen sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the paperwork of 15 years of homeownership. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, property tax bills, all of it suddenly suspect. She picked up her original purchase agreement and began reading it carefully, line by line, looking for the details she had glossed over in her eagerness to buy her first home. She was 43 pages in when she found it. a single paragraph buried in the legal boilerplate that referenced the underlying ground lease agreement as recorded with the county. Ground lease agreement. Karen's hands shook as she continued reading. There it was, in black and white. Buyer acknowledges that this property is subject to a master ground lease with Willow Creek Development Company, LLC, and that ownership of the underlying land remains with the lessor. She had signed this document. She had acknowledged this arrangement. 15 years ago, she had agreed to buy a house on land she didn't own, and she had somehow managed to forget or ignore that crucial detail. The phone rang, jarring her out of her shock. It was Robert Thompson. "Karen, I have the property records." "And?" she asked, though she already knew what he was going to say. "Everything he told you is accurate. Rivera Holdings, LLC completed the purchase of the master ground lease 6 months ago. They now hold the underlying lease for the entire Willow Creek Estates development." Karen closed her eyes. "What are my options?" "Legally? Very limited. The sale appears to have been conducted properly. All relevant notices were published, and the transaction was recorded with the county as required." "What do you mean notices were published?" "Legal notice of the lease transfer was published in the local newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks, as required by state law. It ran in February." Karen tried to remember February. Had she been traveling? Dealing with some HOA crisis? How could she have missed legal notices about her own community? "But surely the residents have some rights," she pressed. "Of course. You have all the rights outlined in your individual lease agreements. But ultimate authority over the property rests with the landowner, which is now Rivera Holdings." "What about the HOA? What about our authority to make and enforce community standards?" Thompson was quiet for a moment. "Karen, I need to be direct with you. The HOA's authority exists only because it was permitted by the original developer. If the new landowner chooses to revoke that permission, he can dissolve the HOA entirely." "Yes." Karen felt like she was suffocating. "There has to be something. Some legal recourse. Some way to fight this." "There might be," Thompson said carefully. "If you can prove that the residents weren't properly notified of the sale, or if there were irregularities in the transaction process. But from what I can see in the records, everything appears to have been done correctly." Karen woke up at 3 a.m., her mind churning with fragments of the community meeting. She had barely slept, replaying Marcus Rivera's presentation and the enthusiastic response from her neighbors, people she had served faithfully for 3 years, who now seemed ready to abandon everything she had built for the promise of reasonable regulations. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table trying to formulate a plan. There had to be something she could do, some angle that everyone was missing. She pulled out her laptop and began researching, diving deep into property law, ground lease agreements, and tenant rights. By dawn, Karen's eyes were burning, and her coffee pot was empty, but she had found something, a potential weakness in Marcus Rivera's position. According to her research, master ground leases typically required specific notice periods for major policy changes, and tenants had certain rights regarding community governance structures. She dialed Robert Thompson's office the moment it opened, at 8 a.m. "Bob, I need you to look into tenant rights under master ground lease agreements. Specifically, what kind of notice is required for changes to existing governance structures?" "Karen," Thompson's voice carried a note of weary patience. "We've been through this. The lease transfer was handled properly." "I'm not talking about the transfer. I'm talking about his plans to essentially dissolve the HOA and replace it with his own authority. Don't tenants have rights regarding existing community structures?" There was a pause. "That's, actually an interesting question. Let me do some research and call you back." While waiting for Thompson's call, Karen decided to do some investigating of her own. If Marcus Rivera thought he could simply waltz into her community and tear down everything she had built, he was going to discover that Karen Middleton didn't surrender without a fight. She started with the basics. Who exactly was Marcus Rivera? And how had he managed to purchase an entire residential development without anyone noticing? Her first stop was the county recorder's office. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Sandra, who had helped Karen with various HOA research over the years, greeted her with a knowing smile. "Let me guess," Sandra said. "You're here about the Willow Creek lease transfer. You knew about this?" "Honey, it was all over the legal notices for weeks. Big transaction like that, it generates a lot of paperwork." Karen felt her face flush. "I never saw any legal notices." They ran in the Tribune for 3 weeks straight, starting in early February. Pretty standard for this type of transaction. February. Karen racked her brain, trying to remember what had been happening in February. Then she remembered the Great Garden Bed controversy. Mrs. Patterson had attempted to plant unauthorized flowers in the common area, leading to a month-long dispute that had consumed all of Karen's attention. While she had been focused on preventing a resident from planting petunias without board approval, someone had been quietly purchasing her entire neighborhood. "Tell me about Marcus Rivera," Karen said, trying to keep her voice casual. "What do you know about him?" Sandra pulled up the relevant files on her computer. "Rivera Holdings, LLC, incorporated 18 months ago. The principal address is..." She squinted at the screen. 1247 Maple Drive, Willow Creek Estates. Karen's heart skipped. "He's been living in my community for 18 months? According to this, yes. Looks like he started as a tenant, then incorporated his business 6 months later." "A tenant," Karen repeated slowly. She remembered 1247 Maple Drive. The previous owners, the Johnsons, had moved out about 18 months ago after Mr. Johnson lost his job. They had rented the house to a young professional, a quiet tenant who never caused any problems, never violated any regulations, never even attended HOA meetings. Marcus Rivera had been living under her nose for 18 months, and she had never paid him any attention because he followed all the rules. "Sandra, I need you to pull everything you have on Rivera Holdings. Incorporation documents, business filings, financial disclosures, everything." "Karen, most of that information isn't public record. Pull what you can." An hour later, Karen sat in her car outside the county building, reviewing the limited information Sandra had been able to provide. Rivera Holdings, LLC had been incorporated with Marcus Rivera as the sole principal. The business address was his residence in Willow Creek Estates. The stated purpose was real estate investment and property management, but there were gaps in the story. How does a young man who needs to rent a house in suburbia suddenly acquire the capital to purchase an entire residential development? Where had the money come from? Karen's phone rang. It was Robert Thompson. "Karen, I have some news. It's not what you were hoping for, but it's something." "Tell me." "Under state law, tenants in master lease communities do have certain rights regarding governance changes. If the existing community has an established homeowners association that's been operating for more than 2 years, the landlord can't simply dissolve it without following specific procedures." Karen felt a surge of hope. "What kind of procedures?" 90-day notice to all residents, followed by a community vote. If more than 60% of residents vote to maintain the existing HOA structure, the landlord has to honor that decision for at least 1 year before proposing changes again. So he can't just eliminate the HOA? Not immediately, no. But Karen, there's a catch. What kind of catch? The landlord can still override HOA decisions that he deems unreasonable or harmful to property values. Essentially, the HOA can continue to exist, but with significantly reduced authority. Karen's hope deflated slightly, but it was still something. How do I invoke these protections? You need to file a formal objection to the governance changes with both the landlord and the county within 30 days of being notified of the changes. 30 days from when? From yesterday's meeting. The clock is already ticking. After hanging up with Thompson, Karen sat in her car, her mind racing. She had found a legal avenue to fight Marcus Rivera's changes, but it would require mobilizing. The same community that had seemed so enthusiastic about his proposed reforms. She needed allies. She needed residents who shared her concern about maintaining standards and preserving the community they had all worked to build. Her first stop was Margaret Chen's house. Margaret had been her closest supporter on the HOA board, and if anyone would understand the importance of fighting these changes, it would be her. Margaret answered the door in her gardening clothes, soil-stained gloves in hand. "Karen, I was just working in my backyard. Did you see? I'm finally going to plant those roses I've wanted for years." Karen felt a sinking sensation. "Without board approval?" "Well, according to Mr. Rivera's presentation last night, I don't need board approval for standard landscaping anymore." Margaret's smile was brighter than Karen had seen it in years. "Isn't it wonderful? I've been wanting to plant roses since we moved in, but the approval process was so complicated." "Margaret," Karen interrupted, "we need to talk about what's happening here. This Rivera person is destroying everything we've built." Margaret's smile faded. "Karen, I know change is difficult, but maybe this is good for the community." "Good?" "Margaret, he's eliminating the standards that have kept our property values stable. He's turning our well-managed community into some sort of free-for-all." "But, Karen," Margaret said gently, "his changes don't seem unreasonable. Small garden ornaments, flexible landscaping rules, extended hours for outdoor gatherings, these aren't radical changes." "They're the beginning of the end," Karen insisted. "You give people an inch, they take a mile. Next, someone will want to paint their house purple or park an RV in their driveway." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Karen, can I ask you something? When's the last time you actually enjoyed living here?" The question caught Karen off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when's the last time you looked around this community and felt happy about it instead of worried about what might go wrong?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, then found herself struggling for an answer. When was the last time she had felt happy about Willow Creek Estates instead of anxious about maintaining its standards? "That's not the point," she said finally. "Happiness isn't the goal. Stability is the goal. Property values are the goal." "Maybe they don't have to be mutually exclusive," Margaret suggested. Karen left Margaret's house feeling more isolated than ever. If she couldn't count on her closest ally to understand the threat they were facing, how could she hope to mobilize broader community support? She spent the rest of the morning going door to door, speaking with residents about the importance of preserving the existing HOA structure. The responses were universally disappointing. Mrs. Patterson was enthusiastic about being able to display small decorative items in her garden. The Hendricks were excited about the prospect of hosting evening barbecues without worrying about noise violations. The Chens were planning an elaborate holiday light display for the first time in years. By noon, Karen had spoken with 15 households and found exactly 0 residents who shared her concerns about Marcus Rivera's proposed changes. Frustrated and exhausted, she returned home to find a manila envelope stuck in her front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a formal notice from Rivera Holdings, LLC. "Dear residents," the letter began, "this notice serves to inform all tenants of the Willow Creek Estates community of proposed changes to Community Go." Karen arrived at Cafe Roma 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of HOA meetings where punctuality was both expected and respected. She chose a corner table with clear sight lines to the entrance and exit, a strategic position that would allow her to maintain control of the conversation and leave quickly if necessary. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, her navy blazer, white blouse, and the gold HOA president pin prominently displayed. This wasn't a social lunch. It was a business meeting with someone who posed a threat to everything she had worked to build. At exactly 1 p.m., Marcus Rivera walked through the door. He was dressed casually again, khakis and a button-down shirt, but something about his bearing suggested this was intentional rather than careless. He moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control, though he maintained that same easy smile that Karen found so irritating. "Mrs. Middleton," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here to listen to whatever justification you think you have for dismantling our community," Karen replied crisply. "But I want to be clear from the start. Nothing you say is going to change the fact that what you're doing is wrong." Marcus signaled the waitress and ordered a coffee. "Would you like anything to eat? Their sandwich menu is excellent." "I'm not here to socialize." "Fair enough." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Karen with those same alert eyes that had unnerved her during their first encounter. "Mrs. Middleton, what do you know about the financial history of Willow Creek Estates?" The question surprised Karen. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me. When you bought your house 15 years ago, what did you pay for it?" Karen hesitated. It seemed like a strange line of questioning, but she decided to play along. $240,000. "And what do you think it's worth now?" "The last assessment put it at $260,000. Marcus nodded slowly. $20,000 of appreciation over 15 years. In a market where comparable properties in neighboring developments have appreciated by 60 to 80%. "Our market has been stable," Karen said defensively. "Stability is more valuable than volatile appreciation." "Is it?" Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed Karen a spreadsheet. "These are the property values for comparable developments within a 5-mile radius. Every single one has significantly outperformed Willow Creek Estates." Karen glanced at the numbers, feeling uncomfortable. Property values aren't the only measure of community success. "You're right," Marcus agreed, "but they're a pretty good indicator of whether people actually want to live somewhere. Tell me, Mrs. Middleton, how many houses have sold in Willow Creek Estates over the past 3 years? I don't keep track of every real estate transaction." "I do. 7 houses have sold in 3 years. In a development of 48 homes, that's a turnover rate of less than 5% per year. The regional average is 12%. Karen felt a growing unease. "People are happy here. They don't want to leave." "Or they can't leave," Marcus suggested quietly. "Because their property values have stagnated to the point where they can't afford to sell and buy something better elsewhere." "That's ridiculous. Our residents are perfectly free to—" "Mrs. Middleton," Marcus interrupted gently, "when's the last time you saw a family with young children move into Willow Creek Estates?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, then found herself genuinely trying to remember. When was the last time? The Hendricks had moved in 3 years ago, but their children were already teenagers. Before that, "Young families can't afford our properties," she said finally. "Actually, they can afford them. What they can't afford is the lifestyle restrictions that come with them." Marcus swiped to another screen on his tablet. "I've reviewed 3 years of HOA meeting minutes. In that time, your board has issued over 200 violation notices for things like unauthorized holiday decorations, children's toys left in yards overnight, and unapproved playground equipment. Standards require enforcement." "Do they? Because I've also reviewed the demographics of your community." Another screen. Average age, 57. Number of children under 10, 3. Number of teenagers, 2. This isn't a family community. Anymore, Mrs. Middleton, it's a retirement community with a few holdouts. The numbers hit Karen like a physical blow. She had always prided herself on knowing her community inside and out, but she had never looked at it from this perspective. "There's nothing wrong with having a mature community," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "There's nothing wrong with it," Marcus agreed, "but it's not sustainable. Communities that don't attract young families eventually die. Property values stagnate, local businesses close, schools lose funding. It's a slow death spiral." "So your solution is to tear down all our standards and turn us into some sort of chaotic free-for-all?" "My solution," Marcus said, pulling up, Another document is to save Willow Creek Estates from bankruptcy. Karen stared at him.